I got a call from Roland White. So it pops up. It's like Roland White. And I was like, oh, this is it. I'm getting called up to the majors. I'm moving to Nashville. He needs a fiddle player. It's going to be amazing. So I answer the phone and he says, hi, I have 3 Nates in my phone. Which one are you? And that was the call.
Hey guys, my name is Jade Thornberry, and I'm here with my good friend Nate Lee, who is quite possibly one of the best teachers I've ever had. I took lessons with him for a real long time, and then in years since, we've had a really good opportunity to be able to work together a few times. So, hi Nate.
Hey, Jade, it's great to see you. Thanks for having me on your channel.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to talk to you. So, I like to do these interviews. I call them Artist Insights on my YouTube channel because who wants to listen to me talk for half an hour when we
I
can
do.
both of us talk for half an hour? We were just wondering how you first got into music and what inspired you to make it into a career instead of just a hobby.
Well, it all started when I saw somebody playing a violin. I had never tried an instrument before, had never really considered it, and I was 8 years old, saw somebody playing a violin, and I was like, all right, that's pretty cool. I don't think I had seen anybody play an instrument other than my dad strumming his guitar. So I saw that, and it was the first time I ever noticed it. So I asked for violin lessons, and I got them, and I had a really great Suzuki teacher. His name's John Brawand, and very upbeat, really good with kids, just really upbeat sort of guy. And got through about Suzuki Book 1, I think. And, this was the kind of traditional extracurricular style where you would sign up for a semester and then there would be a Christmas break. And then do you want to sign up for the next semester and summer break? So I think I did 2 semesters of that. And in the second half, we went to Six Flags Over Texas. You may know that theme park. And they had, I don't know if they still do, but they had every September this thing called a Heritage Festival where they would mainly just have like old time bands and bluegrass bands and string bands. And, it was the first place I saw a hammered dulcimer. And so I hear some bluegrass and some old time and all of those things. And the band that caught my eye the most was called the Prairie Land String Band. And they played with hammered dulcimers, mandolin, fiddle, sang songs, that kind of stuff. They had a lot of really good shtick too. My favorite part is when they were going to sell their albums, they would play this. They'd play Drowsy Maggie, like really laid back, just like. And everybody would get out their, what do you call those old watches on the chain?
Pocket watch.
Yeah, they get out their pocket watches and start waving them and be like, you are getting sleepy. You will form 2 lines to go by. And it actually worked pretty well. So anyway, that was my introduction to fiddling and to mandolin. So went back to the teacher and said, I've discovered fiddling. I'd actually first asked my parents, like, hey, check out the mandolin. I really want to do this. They bought one for my sister, who did not want to play the mandolin. She wanted to play the piano. So go back to the teacher, hey, I've discovered fiddling. And he was just like, all right, find a book and bring it. And that's like 1 in a million for violin teachers to do that. So I got Mel Bay's Easiest Fiddling Book and brought it in, and he would teach me those songs. And it was a couple of years before I could get my hands on a mandolin. But I learned some fiddle songs and then eventually found a fiddle teacher who knew some Texas old-time fiddle, that kind of stuff, and learned from there. I think there was a second half to your question, but I don't remember what it was.
That's okay. What pushed you to make it a career instead of just a hobby?
I didn't even consider it until I first went to Camp Bluegrass. I was 10 years old when I went to Camp Bluegrass and met a bunch of professional musicians there. And I thought that was pretty cool. And it was probably a few years of going to Camp Bluegrass before I thought, oh, this would be a pretty cool career. I hadn't really considered. What's that?
It was pretty much the same for me. I didn't consider it until like repetitive times of seeing people who were making it but not famous.
Yeah, exactly. And, they were what we call bluegrass famous, a number of them. And then a number of them were what you see a lot in instruction in bluegrass type camps, which is people who are excellent teachers that may or may not have toured at all, a number of them, but they were really good teachers and really good players. So that's when I was inspired to do that. And from that point, I didn't really consider anything else from the time I was probably about 13 and just never considered another option. You know, the family business was plumbing. That was an option. There were a lot of trades to go in, could go to college and do something. My mom always said, you need to go into computers. That's where the money's going to be, computers. And she was right, but I did not go into computers.
That's hysterical.
Yeah, it turns out there's not actually a job called computers, but if you can use one, it's a good gig.
I'll keep that in mind for a fallback.
Well, as you know, my opinion on fallbacks, I believe, is aspiring musicians need to be careful about fallbacks because if you have one, you almost certainly will use it and the music career's over.
Right. Right. My fallbacks are like if something drastic happens and I break my arm into a million pieces and all of a sudden I can't play anymore.
Mine is disability insurance. So.
Solid plan.
Yeah. Motivational speaking. I'll get a real sharp looking suit and do that.
Look great. It'll look great. It'll look great over this Nate Lee t-shirt.
It really would. We could start wearing Chuck Taylors.
So, when was your first big break into like being a professional musician, and how did it like shape your career or move your career in a particular direction?
Well, there were a few, and I think big breaks occur on different levels throughout someone's career. And in the beginning, a big break is, small when you think about it from a professional musician standpoint. So there was a guy named Jim Paul Miller who was one of my introductions to bluegrass shortly after going to Camp Bluegrass, or maybe even slightly before. I had gone to some shows this guy would put on in Garland, Texas, and the organization was called Garland Square Pickers. So I would go to that, and probably about the time I was 13, I think, he called me one day and he was like, hey, I want you to be in my band. And his band was it was usually the same people, whoever can arrive, not practicing. They all knew the songs. They jam on them all the time. And so I got to do that. And after that, there was an offshoot from that, the band called Back Porch Tradition. I actually have a live show of that I'll have to share with you sometime.
Yeah.
And played in that band. That was my first big break. After that, I gigged around Ellis County a little bit in Texas, and the one that I think is truly could be called a real professional break is I got to South Plains College in fall of 2005. Over winter break, Alan Mundy's band, the Alan Mundy Gazette, had the mandolin player leave, this great player named Glenn Mitchell. I think he went into the oil business, which, as you know, in Texas, it's not a surprise to hear that. And I was at the right place at the right time. They needed somebody who was in West Texas, or at least near enough to drive in Texas, who could play the mandolin, and I also played the fiddle. So they asked me to join, which is a big deal, and we immediately went into the studio, recorded 2 tracks, which are not released. I have those recordings, but the reason is we went 5-piece shortly after, and then someone left the band. Phil Elliott left the band to focus full-time on his capo business and to, slow down, enjoy retirement a little bit. So those 2 tracks were never released. I may put them out in some form at some point.
Elliott Capos?
Yep. Phil Elliott from Elliott Capos. And that's when Elliott Rodgers came in the band, and half the fans never realized it was a different Elliott.
Oops. That's hilarious. That's so funny.
Yeah, and we did make an album. That lineup made a full album. It was called Made to Last. Put out in, I think, 2008, something like that.
Nice. I really love, I don't think it was a Country Gazette album. I think it was an Alan Mundy Gazette album where it's like a cartoon and he's out in the desert and he's got a phone with a cactus or something.
Oh, yeah. Hello, Operator.
Yes,
is the title of that album. That might be the one that had Sweet Alice Chalmers on it. I remember everybody listening to it on burned CDs when I was in college. Everybody listened to everything on burned CDs. Of course, legally acquired, you just needed a burned backup so you wouldn't scratch the original. Because of that, none of the song names or anything were on any of them. You're lucky if there was the name of... I have gazillion CDs that just say Bluegrass 2, that kind of thing on it.
I had imported music from a burned CD onto my laptop, which got onto my phone on my downloaded music. And the other day, something popped up, and it was like Brad Paisley, but it was not Brad Paisley. And so many different things are mislabeled. I'm like, oh, I didn't know Brad Paisley sang this song. Wait a minute.
I've been going through my collection lately and finding all kinds of stuff, much of it mislabeled. I recently digitized a number of, remember those wheels of CDs about this tall, you'd buy the blanks? A number of those with various burnt CDs and things from, Western Swing Ensemble 2007, those types of things.
Nice. All those cool mementos.
Absolutely, that are now gone, and it's hopefully saved on a hard drive that I won't pour water on.
Yeah, that'd be ideal. Your time at SPC, what inspired you to start teaching?
So I started teaching when I was about 15, I think. And I'd always been interested in teaching. Like anything I would do, I would kind of think about what were the steps and that kind of stuff. If I was playing by myself or whatever, building, a sandcastle, I'd be kind of going over the steps to myself. Like it's important to get the sand wet enough, but not too wet, and just really looking at all the steps. So when I decided to start teaching, when there was an opportunity at a guitar store nearby, I had already done a lot of thinking through how things worked. And I was very bad at first, really, really quite bad as a teacher at first. It was better than nothing, and nothing was what was available in Ellis County. So what really inspired me to do it was I'd been working in the plumbing business, the family business, and I could do that for $12 an hour, which was, not really all that bad in what would it have been like 2001, 2002 for a 15-year-old. But I found out about a place I could teach. Now, I made a big early career mistake there, which is that the person who hired me, I was in the music store one day, he said, I need a teacher, and I will pay you a certain amount. And we made a deal, set up the first day. The day before I was going to start, he called me and he was like, well, you're like younger, and I think the other teachers would probably be mad if I paid you the same, so I'm going to pay you less. And it was, whether it was a deliberate bait and switch or not, I'm not really clear. But it was a switch, and I accepted it. And instead, I should have said no and not chosen to work with somebody who was going to act that way. And it really was not the best experience teaching there. So I ended up moving on to the studio where I had been learning ever since I was like 11 years old, 12 years old, something like that, and taught there, where I was paid the amount that other teachers were getting paid. Not the most senior ones, like my teacher she was still my teacher. She was, of course, charging more. But it was a much better situation, more dedicated students, and it was, a very, very dedicated fiddle studio with some mandolin focus as well. So that turned out to be a really great place to teach.
That's neat. That's really cool. I've never taught in other than camps, I've never taught in an environment where I wasn't in charge, which has been mostly a good and a bad thing. I've made all of those mistakes for myself, but
How we learn.
We creep up in pay every year a little bit as our skill increases and as we make fewer drastic teacher mistakes.
Yeah, and when I was coming up, and even when you were coming up, there wasn't a lot of information out there for the teaching business. There were people that would share things with you, but even back then, like, teaching itself was not all that honed. And I think a lot of us can remember early teachers who were doing their best, but they were teaching the way they had been taught. And
Right.
This is extra bad in violin. And those methods don't always work, and they don't always work for every student. So moving forward, future teachers have templates from watching all these great teachers. But I was lucky enough to watch Steve Smith quite a bit, and he's one of the best teachers I've ever encountered. And then watching Gerald Jones, who didn't teach with a method, but he taught with, here's a cool thing, and that you're going to carry this with you for the rest of your career. I think it's important to have a mix like that.
Nice. That's really cool. I remember, because some of my first good teacher experiences were with you. I had some like piano lessons and violin lessons when I was a kid, and they were good. but I distinctly remember the first time ever thinking about the science of learning with you when you were making me read all those books. I say making. I have never ever been made to read anything in my life. I read everything, including cereal boxes. And I loved all those books. I still read Mindset probably once a year,
It's a great book.
every so often. I love that one.
Yeah, that changed a lot for me because it was part of my introduction to the idea that great players, great whatever, didn't just roll out of bed one day and know how to do the thing they were doing. That if you really look at the backstory, you can see how they got there, usually with some pretty clear steps.
Right. And then the talent code kind of touches on that too, doesn't it?
Quite a bit, and that's another one of my favorites. And I like with the talent code how much it tells stories, and it does a really good job of busting myths. And a lot of people do not like that book, and they do not like Mindset
Really?
either. And this is just some mind reading and maybe my own biases and opinions. But I think the reason that people don't like those books is it removes a lot of excuses. It's very easy for somebody to say, oh, well, I'm just not going to be good at the mandolin. That's why I'm not good, is I just wasn't born with special mandolin talent. And really, what I see in players who talk about that, if they've read the book or hear these types of concepts, is, and I see firsthand evidence of this, they're not even trying. And I think a big reason for that is they were told their whole life that people who are good at stuff didn't try. And as you know from reading Mindset,
Right.
a big problem in our culture is if you admit that you've been trying really hard, people think, oh, well, you're kind of stupid, and that's why you're having to try. So people in all fields, in school and everything, will act like they didn't. A student told me a really interesting story, somebody who was a doctor. And there was, when she was in medical school, there was this one guy, just kind of a jerk. These days you'd probably call him a mansplainer. And he would come into the library where they were studying and would just walk over to the table and be like, you have to read this and whatever. Oh, I just go in and I take the tests and I'm so good. And he would do this constantly at the school library. So one day my student decided she needed to look at a different wall while studying. So she goes to a different library in town, and there is this guy sitting on the floor with books and papers and everything strewn all the way around him, intensely studying. He had just been lying the whole time. She caught him and he was pretty sheepish.
I bet. Oh my gosh. That's crazy.
Yeah, it was one of the best stories I've ever heard.
Well, and we're kind of even taught from a fairly early age that you're really either an artistic person or you're an analytical person, and they start everyone kind of just starts putting you in a box. I even fell victim to this even recently. I have never thought of myself as a math or a science person. I'm always more creative, artistic. But I was super lucky last semester to have an incredible chemistry teacher who taught in a very growth mindset friendly way. Like, this is okay. We're going to repeat the steps. We're going to practice the skills. We're going to make you sure you understand the skills, not just memorize terms. And I made it out of the class with an A. When I had never really done that before in a science or a math class. And it's really just all about how you practice something and how you learn something.
Totally is. I had the same problem. Now, the education I got was one of the typical homeschool educations, which is an assumption that you're going to go into a trade. So what that comes with, and not just from parents, but we did, homeschool co-op as well. And there's a number of people there that their assumption is not that you're going to go to college or whatever, especially with certain students. They'll look at them and be like, nope, that's going to, they're going to be a mechanic or something. They need to go do, a dumb person career. So I got a terrible education. It really, I was totally equipped to go into the plumbing field or the music field if I wanted to. So in those areas, that was really great. But
Yeah.
I got to Cedar Valley College in Dallas to do dual credit courses, mostly in music, and you had to take an entrance test, and I flunked pretty much everything. And one of the good friends I had at the time actually flunked everything and ended up just ditching out and went on to actually become a master plumber and a good one. But it wasn't until I got to SPC that I had a teacher similar to what you're talking about. I had to have a math credit. As you know, you have to have very few non-music credits to get out of there. So I chose college mathematics because that was I asked around, that was the easy one. They were like, it's actually
that's
basically,
what I had too.
yeah, which is really high school mathematics, not even senior high school mathematics. And the teacher was great, and I learned to do math. I don't remember any of it, but I was getting straight A's.
That was not my experience, but I'm glad you had that one. It was over Zoom. My eyes kind of wander a little bit when I'm thinking. And so when they were wandering, I'm not looking at anything. I'm looking at the trim on my window right there. But she thought I was cheating, and she'd yell at me constantly. It was over Zoom. She'd yell at me constantly. She made me cry in class. She called me once. Oh my gosh, it was so bad.
Wow. Yeah, it can be all about the teacher because it was probably the same curriculum, but the teacher I had was awesome. And I had people I knew that were good at math who would help me too. So I'd be working on my homework and they'd be like, hey, how can I do this? And they'd help. But that was one of the first experiences I had. This was long before I learned about mindset and the talent code, all that stuff. It was one of the first experiences I had learning to do something I thought I couldn't learn. And that really helped when it came to music stuff to be like, all right, there's this thing, I was able to learn math. Maybe I can do this other thing. And it helped a lot, even though it took a while to fully form my approach to the world.
Now, I don't even remember if I do know this or not. When were you first introduced to theory, and then when did you figure out that it really did translate to your instrument and not just stuff you had to do on a paper for an assignment?
Yeah, I remember exactly when. So I'd always felt like I didn't need to read music because I was going to play bluegrass, and that actually is true. You don't need to. But it's a little bit like... It's kind of like going into life and saying, all right, I'm going to do, something, maybe work with your hands or whatever. I'm probably not going to need to be able to read a lot. So I'm not going to bother. It's easier if you can read, but there's lots of things you could do if you can't read a book. It's plenty of things. The trouble is it slows you down when you can't. So with learning to read music, that was something I really resisted, but I was kind of open to the idea too. And I was interested in more styles of music. And I knew in some of those styles, you really needed to understand more than, well, my one chord's here, four's here, five's here. I know when they say B flat, this is the fret I start on. You can really get through like a lot of bluegrass doing that. You can't get through things like jazz with that small amount of information. So when I went to take those dual credit courses, I had one of the best teachers I've ever had. His name was Dr. Germany, and he's probably retired by now, but he was the main theory teacher there in the department and directed all the musical theater and all that kind of stuff. He really knew his stuff and was very good as a teacher. He was also, I got along great with him, but he was also kind of hated by a lot of the students because he was very particular. He didn't allow any shenanigans. He didn't allow excuses. And with his methods, it would be very hard for someone not to get it because he didn't give you a ton of stuff. He'd say, all right, this week is key signatures. And he would print out, I think it was always 11 for some reason, 11 pages. And he would be like, all right, by the time I see you Thursday, you're turning in 11 of these. And it would be a whole page of staves. And you had to, on each page, write each key signature. It might have even been more than once. You could use a cheat sheet, whatever you wanted to do. It had to come back with those. And then he would teach us like pentachords. He didn't care if we played piano. You needed to be able to, on your desk, show him you could go A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A. And not because he wanted you to play piano, but because he wanted you to visually know where sharps and flats were.
Right.
By looking at it. He wanted you to be able to say it, and he wanted you to be able to write it. So he taught it so well that I ended up getting all the way through sophomore theory. Part of it we did in the summer. He had a number of the students who were doing well just come to his house all summer. And we finished the test. We actually took it at his house. He brought in all of that stuff, got it approved, used the magic pen, and we clept out of the courses. Essentially what happened, even though we had taken the course curriculum through the summer. So I left very prepared with music theory. And the things that I learned, especially about choral arrangements, had a massive impact on how I approach music because it causes me to think about how everything fits together and think about things like if you have a harmony line and one of them just stops for some reason and jumps to some crazy place while something else does something else stupid, it sounds bad. And a lot of the skills I learned there were general rules to make things sound really good.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
There's a song that I put on my last album that I actually had to, we had an assignment. We were learning about diatonic chords. And he told us we had to write a song that used every single one of them. So the song is called Quick Select. Its working title was Triad and True because we were learning triads. So we had to work with triads. So he said you have to use every chord. So because of it, it's got this really complicated chord progression. And at the time, it actually had a C sharp diminished in it because it had to. I later wrote that out of the song because it didn't need to be there. It was there to fulfill the assignment. So when I took this to the studio, actually, I had told the band in the notes, it's very important to give detailed notes to a band that's coming in if you want to not spend too much time forcing them to learn the songs on the spot, which is really not a great thing if you have another option. So I had mentioned that I wanted like kind of a Blackberry Blossom feel to it. So we cut the song, we get done, and one of the band members, we finish it, and one of the band members says, "That's the hardest damn Blackberry Blossom I've ever played."
Do I get to know who that was, or is that just going to be a mystery?
It was Wyatt Rice.
Okay.
It was actually, he's a pretty funny guy and very dry. So it cracked everybody up. He brought a lot of levity to the studio, which was pretty cool.
That's what I've heard. Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah. And one of the best musical experiences in my entire life was to record with Wyatt. I was introduced to bluegrass with this video called, it was the Tony Rice Video Collection. It was them playing at Merlefest, which I still haven't gotten to play there. The one gig, if I could pick anything, everybody's like, oh, I want to play the Opry or whatever. I want to play Merlefest. So hopefully that'll happen. But on that video, Wyatt Rice was on it playing rhythm guitar with Tony. And so I'd been watching him since I first got into bluegrass. So I had told Dan Boner, who produced it, I'd like to have this he was asking, what style of groove are we doing? Are we doing mash grass, traditional grass, whatever? And I said, well, I really like the Tony Rice type groove. And we were choosing the band. And as soon as I said that, he's like, oh, I can get you Wyatt Rice. And I was just like, what? You can? And so we got him, and that was the biggest deal. And we have a picture. It's in the album. It's one of my most treasured things. It's a picture of the band that Dan took, and Wyatt's leaning on my shoulder. And when I got a copy of that picture, I was just like, okay, cool. Well, that's, I can die happy now.
That's hilarious. I love that. I do love that album. That album's a really good one. And I like Quick Select. What's
if I can share the reason where that name came from, because people think it's the programming language, but it's not. I had a working title, and the mastering engineer needed a title so he could finish the last step of encoding things. It was all mastered. Yeah. And it gets to be like 1 a.m. and Dan's texting me, and he's like, mastering engineer's asking me for the name. You need to give him something. And so I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And the way I come up with titles and things like that is to not think about it too much. So I turn on Ratchet and Clank. It was Ratchet and Clank Going Commando. And when you hit a particular button to change your weapons, a menu pops up, and it's called the Quick Select menu. So I'm playing along just like, what am I going to do? And then I go to change weapons. It says Quick Select. And I'm like, I text Dan, it's called Quick Select. It does have a connection, which is the chords move so fast. This is the reason I thought it would be a good name. The chords move so fast, you better select the right one quickly.
That's funny. I love that. I do enjoy naming... now I enjoy naming instrumental tunes. I wrote an instrumental tune, it's probably the best one I've ever written, last April. And it was kind of a funny story. I was messing around at SBC with my buddy Asher, and he was like, oh, anybody can write a instrumental tune. It's just like a chord progression with a bunch of notes. There's no form. I'm like, it does too have to have a form. My favorite form is horse, donkey, horse, cow. Here, I'll show you. And what I came up with was the song that's now known as Wild Country. But we went through probably, I don't know, 80 different names. Had a naming contest on Facebook, where I told people the name with the most likes would be the name it was called. So Asher commented, Asher's real, and then he paid all of his buddies to like his comment. So in his mind, that's what it's called. But
yeah, but that didn't make the cut, huh?
it's Wild Country. Ever since then, every time a catchy little name pops into my head, I have a running list on my phone. And so now when I write a tune, I can just scroll through and I can pick and choose. I'm a huge fan of Calvin and Hobbes, and anybody who's like paid attention to my Instagram stories, it comes across fairly often. And my next song that I'm writing is called Homicidal Jungle Cat.
Oh, that's awesome. Weren't they always transmogrifying things? Is that the right word?
Yes.
Their little...
Transmogrifier.
Which would also be a good tune name.
Yes. Transmogrifying. There would have to be some transposing.
There would. Definitely a few key changes at least.
Yeah.
Maybe genre switching.
Maybe so. Maybe so. It's giving Bela Fleck vibes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think this is your next big hit.
I just was wondering, what gear do you use for your fiddle and your mandolin? And then I was also curious about your camera setup, other than your standing desk.
So the mandolin, this one's the most well-known pava. This is the Wonder Bat. And this was made for me. I had actually tried to get an artist deal with them. I wrote out this whole long proposal and called Tom Ellis up, because he owns the Pava brand and Ellis. And I said, hey, I've written this proposal. I want an artist deal. Will you check it out? And he says, well, Nate, you're late to the party. We're already building you one. And I said, oh, that's so amazing. I spent a lot of time on the proposal. Will you read it anyway? And I don't know if he did or not, but I've been playing this since 2016. It's a really fantastic mandolin. All pavas sound amazing, but they felt like this was one of the better ones they ever made.
Really?
And it sometimes I feel like has an edge over some of the other ones. But they all take their personality, but within a consistent brand like Pava, they're all going to be fairly similar. So I use that and Tone Slabs picks. This one's a tweener, 3-round, I believe they call it. And then for the fiddle, right around this time last year, actually, I got this Russell McCumber. It's amazing. It's just one of the best fiddles I've ever played. I've only ever played maybe one or two other fiddles that I've felt the same way about compared to the McCumber. And one of them was a Silikowski, and then Daryl Anger has this fiddle. It's extremely unique and also kind of sounds like Daryl, made by this guy, Nathaniel, I can't remember the last name. It's wacky looking. Anyway, so those two fiddles had stuck out to me, and this had a lot of the qualities that both of those did. So use that, and then a Arcos Brazil bow. And this isn't a super expensive bow, although they've gone way up now because you can't get Pernambucos so easily. Not a super expensive bow, but it feels good in my hand, and it does the job. For strings, I've been using Ava Perazzis on the McCumber. For the mandolin, most of the time use the Octacore, the Mapes Octacore, which is the best replacement I've found for the EXP CMs that were, or just the EXP line that was discontinued a while back. For the camera, what I don't usually use is my MacBook Pro camera. I always thought Zoom and things like that were giving me such terrible video quality, and I kept trying things, and then I decided to just look up what camera my Mac had, and it's 720p. It's terrible. So I just bought this actually pretty cheap. It was about $50 or something. It's made by Anker, and its highest resolution is 2K, which is plenty for most things. And it's a little more washed out color than I like, but it actually, for instruction, works out pretty well because it mostly eliminates shadows, so you can see things really closely, even if it makes me look like a ghost sometimes.
Oops. Well, I noticed a couple things in there. Do you want to tell a story on why it's called a Wonder Bat?
Yeah, yeah. So it's called the Wonder Bat because of a Simpsons episode called Homer at the Bat. I encourage everybody to go watch it. It is Homer has this magic bat. He's named Wonder Bat that he got from a tree limb that fell down. In the middle of a storm, he had sheltered under the largest tree he could find with a giant piece of sheet metal to shelter him too. So he gets this bat, and he said, I knew it was a very magical, special piece of wood that I could make a bat out of. So I name it after that, and then later find out, because Ned Luberecki was telling Sam Bush about my mandolin, and Sam said, oh, that's not from The Simpsons. That's from a baseball movie called The Natural. The bat's called Wonder Boy. So it turns out it was a parody, and I never knew it.
Oh, that's so funny. I've always been interested in like different names that people give their instruments. Like, oh, why is it named that? My guitar, it's a custom made guitar by a guy here in Lubbock, and I was struggling with what to name it because I've been through the whole process with it, from just literal pieces of wood to a thing I can go play. Um, and the luthier who made it is just about 1,000 years old. I'm not kidding. He retired 30 years ago from being a surgeon. 30 years ago, and he started making guitars then.
Oh, wow.
So we were trying to discuss what I could name it, and he's like, well, it's a guitar for you. And he's so quiet, has a super dry sense of humor. It's like, it's a guitar for you. So why don't you name it EM? Because it's me, spelled backwards.
That's great.
So that guitar's name is M.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I don't usually name instruments, but sometimes a name comes to you, like what happened with your guitar.
Looking back on your career, what are a couple of your just most favorite memories? They could be super funny memories. They could be just really nice ones. Whatever comes to mind.
Yeah, there's a number of them, but two sticking out in my mind right now have to do with Roland White. One of them was, we talked about the big breaks. When I was it might have been on hiatus from SBC, I got a call from Roland White. So it pops up, it's like Roland White, and I was like, oh, this is it. I'm getting called up to the majors. I'm moving to Nashville. He needs a fiddle player. It's going to be amazing. So I answer the phone, and he says, hi, I have 3 Nates in my phone. Which one are you? And that was the call. And Roland was well known for doing this. He would, when you were there in person, he got your number, and he probably started doing this after going through and having to figure out which Nate was who, because he probably had a million numbers. He'd get your number, and then he'd say, stand back. And you'd be like, what? And so you'd stand back, you'd be like, against that wall. Then he'd get out his phone, and he'd take your picture and put it in. But that wasn't the end of it. He would then say, all right, take my picture. And he'd stand back and pose for a picture for your phone. Well, I didn't know how to put a picture in a profile. And this was when it was pretty new. And, I've not ever been somebody who's the first to learn new technology. I usually let other people do that. So it's like, I don't know how to do it. And he's like, take the picture and I'll show you. So he shows me how to do this in his phone. And so we knew each other for a long time. We'd meet at, camps and festivals and things like that. And, we didn't really hang out outside of that, but I'd see him and he'd look at me and he'd go, Nate, Texas. Because he'd finally figured out which one I was and remembered it because, he had my picture and all that, and, which I felt like was an honor if there's already 3 Nates in his phone. Plus there was probably Nate Leith in there too, and we get confused for each other all the time. But a big honor I had that was Roland White related was at his memorial, his band played, the Roland White Band, and they needed a mandolin player. And there's a bunch of mandolin players in Nashville, and this is just how it all works. I happened to know the person who was arranging the show for the memorial. It was pretty much all live music for the memorial. Happened to know him, so I was the one that got the call. I probably wasn't the first call, but I knew him and got the call, so I got to be the mandolin player in the Roland White Band at his memorial, which was really amazing. And sadly, the whole memorial was videoed, and something happened and it was all lost. So there's no video of any of it.
That's so sad. Oh man.
Yeah, bringing it around to a big bummer. But it was a really cool thing, and hearing a lot of people talk about. It's funny, a third memory with Roland. A lot of really good memories with Roland. He was the only person I would ever say yes to playing Orange Blossom Special for. Just because I never really liked the song, and part of it is I don't have a good arrangement. So how could you like it if you don't? Michael Cleveland has an amazing arrangement. If I could play like that, I'd probably like Orange Blossom Special. So I would do it for him. One year, the theme at Camp Bluegrass was the Kentucky Colonels. Yeah. And I was a fiddler on staff. And so, again, right place at the right time. And they had other colonels there. There was Roger Bush, of course, Roland White. Patrick Sauber came to play guitar. He was the Clarence. I played fiddle. And oh, dang it, what's his name? He wrote Wait a Minute. Herb Peterson. Herb Peterson was there. So I got to be in the Kentucky Colonels, and people look at my bio and it lists the bands I've been in. One of them says the Kentucky Colonels, and so they, you think it's a joke, obviously, and I even had people be like, "Hey, I saw that in your bio. You're not old enough to have been a Kentucky Colonel." Nay. And I don't remember if you were at this show or not, but
I was.
Okay, yeah. So we get up there. We had played maybe a song or two. And Roland goes to talk, and there's video of that show somewhere. I might even have it, but I don't know where. And he says, well, thank you, everybody, for coming here. I'm Roland White. This is Herb Peterson, Roger Bush, Patrick Sauber, and Nate Lee. And we're the Kentucky Colonels.
That's awesome.
Yes! I put it in my bio that day, just like he said it. All of our names, one after another, and we're the Kentucky Colonels. So Patrick Sauber also is a member of the Kentucky Colonels. And it was really cool. I wish I had learned more of Scotty's actual solos for that. I played a lot in his style, but I didn't have, I hadn't learned note for note any of his stuff. And I wish I had, because that would have been really cool. But
it would have been awesome.
But nobody can truly be Scotty anyway. So I guess it would have been still just a pale imitation.
A tall, pale imitation.
Yes, exactly. Especially with this camera.
You mentioned a while ago that you've gotten to produce your first album. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it? Yes,
and I think I have it. Oh, yeah. Just happened to have one. Wow. This is Amy Clay, who is my student and has been for years. She started Fiddle with me. I don't even know how long ago. It must have been like 7 or 8 years ago, something like that. And studied fiddle. And, Amy has a career. She's a big boss of something. So anyway, has a career, and she's really gotten into music. And at one point, she comes to her lesson one day and says, I think I wrote a song. And I'm like, okay, well, if you think you did, then you did. And she plays it for me. It was pretty good. I said, go back and work on it more, bring it back. So she did. It got better and better. And then she kept doing it. So at some point she had like 10 songs, and she's like, what do I do now? And I said, well, record them in some form so you don't forget them, and so you can play it for people. So that started with, we're going to record on the iPhone so you have it, and ended up in a full-blown album. So I produced this. It was recorded by Daniel Rice, actually in a studio where Alison Krauss had recorded albums, which is pretty cool.
That's cool.
It's slipping my mind what it's called. So if anybody wants to know, email me, hello@playnately.com. We made the album as Ned Luberecki, Brandon Bostic, Dan Boner, Ashley Cottle, and me. I don't think I'm leaving anybody out. Yeah, that's the whole band. So I'm real proud of it. It came out really nicely, and Amy's still cranking out songs. She's got like enough probably for another full album at this point. So you never know what might happen.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Are there any other projects in the works that you want people to know about, or any past projects that you're super proud of?
Yeah, so Sunday I'm going into a studio to record for Mandolin Mondays. When David Benedict stopped doing them all himself every week, I was the second one. Joe K. Walsh was the first one to do one. I was the second one, and this was a long time ago, like, I don't know, 2019 or something. And he had reached out once or twice times when I just didn't have the bandwidth to do it. So right around the time where he probably thought I was never going to do it, I checked in with him. Hey, do you still want one? He said, yeah. So I'm going in to record. I'm going to record my song, The Machine, which is one that was on the Jim Hurst record that nobody's ever heard, Jim Hurst Trio record.
I have.
Yeah, well, you have. You can't find it. It's on iTunes, but it's really hard to find otherwise. And then next week, I'm scheduled to do another appearance on Mandolins and Beer, the podcast, which I hadn't been on in almost 5 years, I guess. Right
Ah,
around 5 years. So excited to do that. We're going to talk about music instruction and whatever else comes up.
that's cool. That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me today. Um, I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate your friendship and being able to play with you all these years and going from student teacher to peer and more skilled peer. Um, but thank you so much, Nate. This has been awesome.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you so much for having me on. It's really been an honor to talk to you, and I'm really proud of all the things you've done. Watch you have form a real music career for yourself through hard work. So very cool.
Well, thanks.